Inspiration, brave action, and heartwarming journeys. This is what the Louise H. Reed Show brings you. Now, here's your host, Louise H. Reed.
Hello, 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 everybody, and thank you for joining me again this wonderful Tuesday. I'm your host, Louise H. Reed, with listeners in over 145 countries and millions of iTunes downloads and ongoing podcasts. I'm the fortunate host here every Tuesday, live at this time, to talk life and leadership with everyday people doing extraordinary things. People who take brave, bold action in pursuit of their dreams and goals and are here to share their journey to help you do the same in yours. Those who listen regularly know that I say there is nothing more valuable than time. So as a way of showing my gratitude to you for listening each week, everyone who comments on a podcast episode with the hashtag Ladyboss Loyalty will automatically be entered into a draw to win exclusive Ladyboss Loyalty swag. So comment away on Facebook, YouTube, iTunes, or LinkedIn, or wherever you like to catch your podcasts. And just so you know, I'll be choosing and announcing my next winner on next week's show. So comment away. Now let's jump into today's show and to today's guest. We have with us once again, back by popular demand, as I was saying the other day, the Mac is back. So Kris Macc is with us today. She is an author, speaker, consultant, and coach who speaks, writes, and teaches on the topics of leadership, emotional intelligence, trust, vulnerability, and women. From a corporate perspective, Kris brings almost 20 years of sales and training experience, working with Fortune 500 companies in doing all sorts of interesting stuff, including conducting needs assessments, leading advisory boards, launching new products, tactical execution of marketing strategies and pilot projects, team building, creating and facilitating training programs, and assuming many leadership roles. Today, I'm honored to have Kris back for a second time to further explore her Amazon best-selling book, #No Approval Needed. And we'll be jumping into a behind-the-scenes look into her book, and those she interviewed. I've also been crowdsourcing some questions from my community as well as Kris's community, so we'll have questions from some of you who have submitted questions, and I'm ready to jump on in. Kris, welcome back to the show.
So I think you know that this is one of my favorite radio shows / podcasts that I listen to. So I listen to this when I'm at the gym. And I might have shared with you that the one with your mom, I was walking around the track and I was overwhelmed with tears. And it wasn't during the sad part, actually, because there was a sad part where she talked about losing her mom, but it was during the part where she was talking about what success looks like in retirement and how she gets to spend time with her grandkids. And I just was so overwhelmed with emotion because I could see it and I could feel it. And so thank you for all that you do, because I love, love, love every guest that you have on your show.
That's so kind of you to say, Kris. Thank you for sharing that. And I think that's what's so neat and what I enjoy so much about these shows is that, yes, this is a format to it, but it's really about exploring the gems that come up in the context of the hour that we share together. And I think that that's one of the reasons why I'm particularly drawn to you, because that actually is your book.
Yeah.
And so the way that you've been able to do that, I think, and it is interesting, and it's also therefore interesting how you brought that piece up about my mom, because I think that speaks to why you felt compelled to share what you did in #No Approval Needed.
Yeah, thank you.
So I want to jump in with a few of my own questions before we jump into some of the questions that we've solicited from our communities. I know that many people want to write a book. We hear a lot of people saying that. How did you go from wanting to doing? Easy question to ask, but I'm sure there's quite a journey through that. So maybe you could share that with us.
Yeah, well, let me take a quick step back to my school days. I never considered myself to be a good writer. In fact, I hated writing. And part of that stems back from like just my very first real exposure with school in the first grade. And I was not considered to be a good student because I didn't go to a traditional kindergarten. And so my very first experience was the teacher actually wanted to hold me back and make me repeat kindergarten because I didn't come in reading or writing or knowing how to spell. So you can imagine, like, you know, this is your first exposure and you already think that, you know, you're at the bottom. If you're
Isn't that why you go to kindergarten? But
back
anyway.
in the day, well, the school that I went to, those kids started in a very academically oriented kindergarten. I did not. My mother was a teacher. She wanted me to play. And so I went to something totally different. So I go in literally week 1, there's a spelling test. Like, what? And its own colors. I'm like, I don't know how to spell these colors. And I, you know, so I internalized that and was like, oh, I'm not a good student. I was switched to a different school the next year and was at the top of my class. And so then I started to experience success, and but still, even all through, it wasn't until I was in graduate school that I felt like I was a good writer. And that's because we had to write so much all the time. Everything was writing. So I just, you know, got so much practice with it. And I always wanted to write a book. I didn't know what that was going to be on. I really thought I was going to do an expose on the pharmaceutical industry because I spent so much time in there and had so many great stories, but that never materialized. So when I got the idea for this book, I wrote a contract with myself that I signed, and then I went through like a 2-month period where I did nothing with it but berate myself for having this goal, because I allowed self-doubt to creep in and thought, you know, who's going to want to read it? You know, you're really not worthy of considering yourself to be an author. Why would you even think, you know, this crazy idea could come to fruition? All of those things that we do to ourselves. And then, you know, about 2 months after I signed the contract, I had a come to Jesus meeting with myself when I was on a solo retreat. Wow. And had an opportunity to really reflect and say, you know what, if other people can do it, so can you. And you do have good ideas and you are worthy, and, you know, just believe in yourself. And so that's when I started to write the book.
I love that story for so many reasons, because, you know, it really just pulls back the covers a little bit. We've talked about this before, how it's, we've come to learn of you through this book. Some of us obviously knew you before, but through this book where success has been achieved. Mm-hmm. And it's very easy to not delve into the inside stuff that someone had to go through to get to that success. And we're comparing our own inners to someone's outer.
Yeah.
So thanks.
Yeah, and I always think to me, it's always important to share the struggle, because it's so easy to compare your struggles with somebody else's highlight reel and go, oh, you know, she published this book and it's been really well received and that's so awesome. People don't understand that, you know, this was such a journey for me in growth and transformation and really starting to love myself. You know, this was not always the case, and it's still a process.
So how would you say that so further to that comment, how would you say that you've changed through this journey? Or what have you learned about yourself through this journey of writing this book?
To love myself fiercely. So fiercely that when I allow self-doubt or others' negative opinions to creep in, that I'm able to be resilient and fight those off. You know, I was thinking about this the other day. I am a very direct communicator. I am somebody who sort of what you see is what you get, which isn't always appreciated, especially in a corporate environment. And there have been plenty of times, right, where I've been given feedback of like, you know, you're a little too direct, or, you know, just maybe you could soften that a bit. And not to say that that isn't good feedback, because it can be, but it also, is it saying more about you? Then now I've learned to question, like, is that more about your perception of how a woman should present herself versus how I'm delivering it? So I need to look at it both ways. You know, what can I do to be flexible in my communication so that the message is received the best way possible? But also, is that really your own bias is also showing up, right? Like, if a man were to say something the same way, would you have the same perception? And so, you know, questioning that and not internalizing like, oh, it's all me, but, you know, keeping those parts of myself that I think are true to me and are important and need to be shared with the world.
I think that it's amazing what you just shared, because not only is it a story, but you've also given some really tangible, tactical things that people can sort of take away to reflect on themselves and perhaps use. Some of those questions are great. I want to mention at this time, though, that you're sharing that this has been a journey for you, and you are an expert in this field. I've gone through this same sort of journey myself in terms of being an expert in this, the corporate coaching environment. And yet it took me 10 years to get through this particular journey when I had all the tools at my disposal. So I wanted to share that, not to point you out, but more so to really reveal to people how difficult this stuff is.
Yeah.
So where would you suggest that someone should start? And I guess I was specifically referring to your emotional intelligence, like formal education and certification, and using a really useful tool. How would you suggest someone sort of get more in touch, whether they have access to a tool or they don't, get more in touch with that inner emotional intelligence piece?
I think the best place to start, and I don't think we do this enough, is spending time alone in solitude with ourselves, where we can be deep thinkers, where we can get curious, where we can start peeling back the layers about what makes us feel vulnerable, how that shows up for us, how it's manifesting in our relationships at home, at work, how it manifests in what are the things that we give ourselves permission to dream about and to pursue. I mean, there's so many different avenues here. But yeah, it starts with getting curious and not being afraid to be alone. Then you can, when you start to understand that, then I think it's great if you can work with a coach or, work with somebody that can provide an assessment for you. There's a lot of great books out there as well, but I do think it has to start here, because without self-awareness, without curiosity, you cannot improve your emotional intelligence. It's impossible, and that's really where the practice comes into it.
So pause and get curious. I love that. Wanted to jump back into some book questions, because otherwise I'll go down a rabbit hole and I'll forget that I talk about more of what I wanted to ask. So the women that you interviewed, how did you find and select them to be part of the book?
Initially, I thought I was going to interview people in my circle, because I'm in a number of different women's groups and I was hearing all these amazing stories and perspectives. And so I thought, I'll interview these women that are in my circle. So I thought, either from like elementary school, middle school, high school, college, graduate school, or my, work environment, and including some family. And then as I started to think about my journey and the journey of some of the women that I knew, I thought, God, wouldn't it be so cool if I could find out if women from all over the world, from literally every continent, were having a similar journey. And so I really used Facebook and LinkedIn to connect with women all over the world that I did not know. And I put a call out, hey, if you're in your 40s and you're a woman, raise your hand if you would like to be interviewed. I don't care what your race or ethnicity is. I don't care what country you're from. I don't care what you do for a living. I don't care if you're married or not. I don't care if you're gay or straight. I don't care if you have children. I don't care if you're rich or poor. Are you a woman in your 40s? That is all I'm interested in. And so I was able to find women literally from every continent. And I think it made the book so much richer.
I've said it to you before, and I think I said it on the last show when you were on. I'm going to say it again. And it was about I've never had such a moving experience reading a book. I've been devastated before in books, and it's been emotional and I've been crying, but I've never felt a connectedness.
Yeah.
Other people around the world who had never met. It was like the threads that unite us, written in words through your book. And that is quite an art to have done and to have been able to create for us, the readers.
Thank you.
I've realized I've just jumped totally right into your book, assuming that everyone who's listening listened to the first episode, because of course everyone listens to my show every week.
Of course.
Of course. So for those new listeners, can you just give us an overview or some insight into what #NoApprovalNeeded, what your book is about? Yeah,
so I think the easiest way to describe it is if you're familiar with You're a Badass by Jen Sincero, Daring Greatly by Brene Brown, and Sex and the City, it's sort of a mix of those three. So it's really about, being intentional, living authentically, that connectedness that we share in this sisterhood bond with women from all over the world, and that we are more alike than we are different. And by the time we get to our 40s, we know what we like, we know what we don't like, and we are not interested in your permission or approval. It took us a long time to get here, and it's liberating, and we are stepping into that power.
And so thank you for that. I remember reading that, I believe it was probably on your website that I saw that, and I was just like, oh yeah, like that, nailed it, totally nailed it.
Thank
you.
If
that is intriguing for someone who's listening right now who doesn't have a copy of the book yet, how can they get their hands on a copy?
So it's available on Amazon, both in paperback as well as the electronic version, or it can be ordered from any book reseller worldwide.
Okay, awesome. Do you have any questions about that? Have any issues about that? Those listening who want a book, and just reach out to me and I'll make sure you get all of that information so you can get your hands on it. So I think it's appropriate now, based on the fact that you were talking about, it's about women of the world. And I was mentioning how, really your words were like threads that unite us all, despite the fact we're actually strangers. We didn't feel like strangers at all. I wanted to ask one of the questions posed by someone in our community that they asked online. Is that you on the cover of the book? I'd love to know the creative process of how the cover came to be. And this is a beautiful story, so go.
So it is me on the cover, and where I got the idea for this was I had seen a pair of hands that had the continents painted on them, and I love the global representation of that. But those hands belong to a man. And I was like, oh, I don't like that. I need something feminine. And I thought, well, a woman's hands would be too small to really be able to, fit the continents on there. So I wanted to find a feminine canvas. And I thought, oh, a woman's back. How cool would that be? And I didn't want a face to show, because there isn't one face. It's all the women from all over the world, right? So I was on a budget. So I chose to use myself as the model. And I had this amazing artist and photographer who happened to live not too far from me that I found through networking with other women. And she happened to be so talented. And actually, when I presented the idea to her, she told me, I have the continents tattooed on my back. So there is an amazing picture in the back of the book with us side by side. So after she painted me and took the pictures, she set my mom up with the camera, and she ripped off her shirt and was like, let's take this picture. And I think it's so powerful and it's so cool. So her name is Michelle Cottle from Silver Moon Art and Photography, and she's so talented.
I got goosebumps when I read that. When I read that in your book, and I think we may have talked about it before too. Incredible. Those who have the book have probably seen this already. It's on page 245. And those who are listening, I just hop over to my YouTube channel and you can see the picture of it and listen to the show and see the picture of it. I'm showing it on camera right now. Talk about serendipitous.
Totally. I mean, we were meant to work on this project together. And I can't highlight her talent enough, because I feel like the world needs to know about Michelle Cottle. And not only is she talented, but she's just this amazing energy, this amazing person. And I just have so much love and respect for her.
So yeah, great shout out to her. What advice do you have for others who wish to write a book? And I might be asking for a friend.
Oh, yes. First and foremost, I don't think it's even important to know what you want to write about right away. I think if you can mind map, spend 10, 15 minutes mind mapping. Don't judge any idea that comes to your mind. Just jot it down. And then I think, spend more time with that, come back to it again later, mind map some more. Before you know it, it's going to start to bubble up. And whatever interests you, whatever your passion, I would say you definitely want to be passionate about it. Because if you're not, it's going to make it really difficult on those days when you don't want to write to get it done. And build in some accountability. So for me, the built-in accountability was once I started interviewing the women, I knew without a shadow of a doubt that I was going to finish this, because there was no way that I was going to ask these women to be vulnerable and to give me their time and not finish it. So find what works for you and set little mini goals and set larger milestone goals, and then celebrate along the way. There were many, many times that I cried tears of joy in addition to tears of frustration, but let's focus on the tears of joy. But I would reach certain milestones. It's like the first one for me was 5,000 words. Yay, I got to 5,000 words. Go to 10, then set it for 20, keep going. And before you know it, you have a book on your hands.
I love that. I think we spend so much time in our heads.
Way too much
time in our heads. And I'm not an advocate for throwing away the head and living in the heart. I talked about this with my
mother,
yeah. Right? Yeah. And so I really liked how she said that. I also learned a lot about my mom on the show, which was really kind of cool. Because I didn't know she lived so much in her heart. I hadn't known that. But I think what you're sharing here about the mind map and then not judging, like we can do that. We do the head stuff later.
Absolutely. And also when you're actually doing the writing, there were many times where I was like, this is terrible. But I just kept writing, and I would tell myself, stop judging it. And then when I would come back to it, I was like, oh, that's actually pretty good. So don't judge it. Don't judge. That's your own worst enemy when you're writing. Don't judge it.
And so in terms of the process, high level sort of process for writing the book, you shared with us how you got started, that you did the contract. There was a bit of a pause while you gave yourself a kick in the ass.
Yes.
Which kudos to you for doing that. And I'm so thankful that you did, because I've met you through that and had this experience.
Oh, me too.
So what were some of the other things, that beyond setting the mini goals and the larger goals, celebrating milestones? Because I know people supported you in reading it and giving you feedback. Can you talk us through that a little bit?
So I had a beta reader team that, after I finished the first draft, there were a select group of women that read the manuscript and provided really good feedback. And that's what you want. You want people that are going to be honest, that can tell you like, hey, this is confusing. I don't get this, or here's what I would add, or here's what I would take out. And be open to that feedback. Don't be so tied to what you've put together, and just know that they have the best interest. And really, you want their perspective, right? You're not writing for yourself, you're writing for the reader. And so figure out ways you can incorporate that and still maintain, the authenticity and your why for the book. So that was part of it. Also connecting with other authors, learning about, there's something really special about the author community in that people want to support each other. And so they're willing to share, where they stumbled and here's what they would do differently. And the book world is really complex. I didn't know that going in. So it was helpful to navigate all the complexities and nuances that I would have had no idea if I wasn't connected to such a strong author community.
The reality is we don't get anywhere alone, do we? And so another example of this, reaching out to become part of a group of people to help you get where you need to go.
Yes.
And I think there's a lot of people that support you along the way. Obviously, your husband, I know, would have been a massive supporter.
So many. So I have such a tribe of special people in my life. And saying that also, that being really mindful about who you surround yourself with. Who are those people that can challenge you to be the best version of you? And so that means stepping outside of your comfort zone and, not allowing you to come up with lame excuses when it's easy to do that. And so that's part of, surrounding yourself with the right people.
It is. I want to pause here for a moment and say, I think many of us have heard, especially those of us who are personal development kind of addicts. And I would say that I'm probably one of those. I'm like personal development junkie or something.
Yep.
So many of us have heard stepping outside of your comfort zone. I, this week, have stepped outside of my comfort zone big time. It's in relationship to some personal stuff that I kind of got to get in order. And I've been letting slide for a bit.
Yeah.
Stepping outside of my comfort zone, I've forgotten that when you step massively outside of it, everything in you tries to get you to stop doing that, to stay safe. I've been feeling like sick and actually been quite kind of ill, the nasty girl, mean girl head, voice in my head. I'm only bringing this up to say, the comfort zone never, ever feels comfortable.
No.
It's really about recognizing that this is the normal part of growth.
Yep.
Don't get comfortable. You won't get comfortable with it, friends, ever.
Yep.
It's just knowing I recognize this. I've been here before, and I know it's worth pushing through because I know what happens on the other end.
Right. And I always think about it too I'm a neuroscience, no, I wouldn't say junkie, but I appreciate the explanation from a neuroscience perspective that, our ego, that primitive part of our brain, is wired to protect us. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't like novelty. It likes predictable. But mediocrity lies in the predictable. And so any time that we are going outside of the predictable, doing something outside of our comfort zone, that part of our brain sees it as a threat. And so it is going to do everything it can to say, no, don't go there, don't go there, don't go there. It's almost as if we're putting ourselves, in the direction of like a lion who wants to bite our head off. That's how our brain perceives it. And so just know that, okay, my ego is in overdrive. I need to put it in the back seat. This is not a life or death situation. I will be okay. I need to lean into that discomfort. And on the other side, what I'm going to find is magic, and I'm going to find courage.
Yes. To all of that. I too love neuroscience. I'm fascinated by it. And I really think it helps to sort of marry the science and the soul piece.
Yes, me too.
Yeah. Okay, so we have another question from our audience is, what was the earliest, you've talked about this a little bit, but I want to make sure that if there's another example that you have the opportunity to bring it up. What was the earliest memory of writing for you? So post-kindergarten.
Like writing for myself? For pleasure?
I'm not sure how you want to answer that.
I mean, I never, I did a ton of writing, like I said, in graduate school. But that was not fun writing. In college, I actually had a really good class where it was a speech class. So I had to write my own speeches, and I always loved to write things that were controversial or satirical. So there's that side of me that, again, I don't necessarily want to go with the grain. I like to go against the grain. That's part of my personality. So I did enjoy that class, and it's not always appreciated. So that's the thing. And so, writing is very subjective. And so I think part of it is knowing, like, if you like it and your target audience likes it, then you're in a good spot. But not everyone is going to be part of that target audience. Not everyone is going to appreciate what you put together, and that's okay. I know I'm not everyone's cup of tea. That's okay. I've come to terms with that, and I'm okay with that. That we don't have to be. Not everyone's my flavor either. So, just being comfortable in that, but also trying to get better. So where you are missing the mark, if you can incorporate that feedback and really strive to get better and push yourself, I think that's important too. That's
awesome. When did you recall that kindergarten story that you shared at the beginning of our interview, as it related to you writing this book now and the narrative that you had created?
Today. Today is when I recalled that.
That's awesome. And
yeah, that's the truth.
Yeah. I would expect nothing less from you, Kris. As I know you expect nothing less from me. I think that's really interesting because it highlights just how deep these narratives and stories that we create about being good at something, being bad at something, and how that influences the trajectory of our life.
Absolutely. And not only that, I mean, in the book, one of the things that we explore is how women feel about other women. And so going back to how these early experiences in our childhood affect us and how we think about, that schema of how we think about other things also applies to how women feel about other women. And So some of these deep childhood scars where there was like mean girl syndrome going on in early childhood really have shaped the way women develop relationships with other women, how they think about them. And not for everybody, but there was definitely a percentage, a good percentage of women that had that experience, and how hurtful and how deep those scars are. Now we've got to, sort of challenge that and retrain our brains when we get older, because we recognize like we actually are thirsty for these deeper connections with other women. And yeah, that might have been my experience in childhood, but I can change that now. I can change the narrative. It's just going to take some intention and questioning those unwritten rules that are sort of guiding my behavior that I'm not even aware of.
Mm-hmm. You delved just in that answer into one of the topics of the book. So I'd like to just ask another question that came in from one of our audience members. And that's, how did you choose the topics for your book?
It was really self-serving. It was what I was interested in. I'm very fascinated by humans, very fascinated by women specifically. And so in these different women's groups that I'm in, and they don't overlap, I was hearing some similar themes. Like one of them is sex. Women talk about sex a lot more than I think that the men that are in our lives understand. And so, some of the stories were just
Surprise, man. Surprise.
I mean, I think back to a brunch that I went to, and we're at a restaurant. It's a nice restaurant. There's families around, and I am just dying laughing because one of my friends pulls up a picture of a sex swing. It's being handed around. The phone is going around the table, and I'm like, oh my God, I hope that, these other tables can't hear what this conversation is. So it came out of real life experiences and interactions and wanting to know, is this happening everywhere, or is it just in my circle?
And what did you find?
That it is happening everywhere.
It is happening everywhere.
Yeah. It's the human experience. And I think that is really what this book is about, is that there's so much more that we have in common with people that we think are so different from us, and in reality, they are not. At our core, we are fundamentally human. We like the same things. We cry over the same things. We find joy in the same things. We feel shame about the same kinds of things. And so it's really about the human experience.
Yeah, it is fascinating. You said at the beginning of our conversation that we really are more similar than we are different.
Yeah.
And it is when you can peel back the superficial things that we see, that we often find that we're in contention over, right? Or contentious topics. The truth really connects us. Mm-hmm. I also find it really interesting. You were saying a few minutes ago about how you like to write about controversial topics. And I wonder if that expose on the pharma industry will ever be a book that you come back to, because I think that is very fascinating.
Maybe. Listen, I have learned to not rule anything out. I have a very good friend who always says to me, you always say, no, 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 maybe, yes. So I've learned to just keep the options on the table, because I do feel like I have a very flexible mindset for the most part. And so I know myself well enough to know that even when I say no, I'm probably going to end up saying yes.
You also mentioned a little while ago about one of the benefits of being part of an author community and writing community was that you learn from others and some of the things that they would do differently next time. What would you do differently next time?
Oh, well, I would have had an outline for, this seems like this would be common sense, but it's not what I did. I would create an outline for the chapters that I wanted to write, and then subtopics. I didn't do that. Mm-hmm. I made it so much harder on myself, because I just put together a list of questions that I thought were really interesting and fascinating. And I had all these interviews and wonderful perspectives and stories. And then I was like, oh crap, I have to fit this into something that's readable and makes sense. That was very, very difficult. So I would not do it that way again at all. Oh my gosh, that was a nightmare. I wanted to kill myself, but I couldn't.
I'm glad you didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, but created that amount of stress. Okay, that's an interesting one. That's a great one. Another question from one of our audience members. This is from a gentleman. He asked, I would love to hear more about some practical advice based on people's experience when they applied the wisdom provided in the book.
That's a great question. So I've heard from a few people. So a couple that come to mind. One woman was newly retired, so actually older than the genre that I focused on in the book, but I think so much of this book really applies to women of any age, and to men as well. And she said, after she retired, she was feeling very disconnected and feeling like people were moving on with life without her. And when she read my story that I share about after my father died, we had the celebration of life for him, and hardly any of my women friends showed up, and how that was such an aha moment for me that I internalized and said, okay, I need to do something different. Like, I didn't get mad at anyone. I was just like, I don't like this, and what can I do to change it? And so she, took that practical advice and was like, okay, if I want more relationships and deeper relationships and to reconnect, I have to intentionally create that. So that's one of them. I've also had a number of women say, you know what, I use this as a conversation starter with my spouse. And I read certain parts and then we discussed it, and it's opened the dialogue for some of these topics that maybe, we might experience a little bit of shame about, or we're just not comfortable talking about because maybe we've never had these kind of conversations. And so, presenting some of the information and saying, what do you think about this? And, what might we do differently in our relationship, or how do you feel about this? So I think those are probably two good examples.
I love that. I think that it is the way that you have written the book too. It's so, dare I say, conversational? And I don't know how you do that when there's no conversation really happening. I guess because you're conveying answers that you found from people in conversation, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But I felt like I was part of a conversation through the whole book. So I think that really does invite those conversations then to be taken outside of the book. So I love that you heard that feedback as well, that it has been used in that context. What has surprised you most about this process and journey of writing and then launching the book? I'm sure there's a few different learnings through that.
Yeah, so writing was how much I was inspired by the women. And you were one of those women that absolutely inspired me. And I feel like I'm right in the middle of something right now, so I can't exactly share the specifics around that, but I'm thinking like a year from now, you and I will have another conversation and I will tell you exactly how you inspired me. So you, as well as many of the other women, where I learned so much about myself through the process, where I was like, oh, that's an aha moment for me. Learning to it was very liberating for me to have that validation. Like, I'm not the only one. And I know that's been really felt around the world from women who have read this. I mean, I get messages almost daily of like, oh my gosh, I'm not the only one. So that I had that same experience. After I finished writing the book, I was caught by surprise by my own reaction, because I had moments of panic when I realized that people were reading it.
What did you think people were going to do with your book?
I got so caught up in the creative process in trying to represent my interpretation of the conversations authentically and doing it justice. But I also infused a lot of myself in some of the stories.
You did.
And so I recognized when people started reading it that they were going to know me in a very different way. And so it was another layer of vulnerability. And I literally was like, oh my gosh, can I take it back? And at this point, there were like 300 people that had an advanced copy of it. I reckon it literally is like having a baby. You can't take it back. The baby is full. So you gotta live with that. And I happened to see Brene Brown's Netflix special, and she was talking about after she had her TED Talk, and it started to go viral, and and she had these moments of panic because people were saying horrible things online, and she recognized at one point, like, you know what, I need to stop listening to the people in the cheap seats. They're not even in the arena. And that was so helpful for me, because I was like, you know what, if people don't like it, that's on them.
Mm-hmm.
That's on them. I can't control that. But I haven't had that experience so far, so.
Oh, good. I'm happy to hear that. I think it's interesting how you likened it to having a baby, because, and I think there are in a few ways. One is that there's no return policy,
Right.
and also the extreme level of vulnerability for those of us who have birthed a child vaginally versus through through C-section. That is pretty vulnerable, especially when you have like SWAT teams coming in or teaching groups coming in, and you're just, it's all out there for all to see. And you're not getting anything back from them. It's a one-way show.
Yeah.
And so that's what you've just done in sharing yourself with the book. It's, through relationships that we have with others. You and I go for coffee and I share something vulnerable. You accept it lovingly, compassionately, or not, right? And then there's a response. There's usually a vulnerability sharing both ways. That's not happened here. You've just woo,
yes.
there it is.
So you just made me think of this story, and it equates to exactly how I felt after I gave people an opportunity to read the book. When I was pregnant with twins, and I know you had twins also, I went into preterm labor. And I was at a hospital that had a perinatology team, and because they were the only game in town, they're really good, but they were the only game in town. They were the ones that would teach everybody. And so I'm in the hospital, and they're going to do some kind of test to see if the babies are coming like right now, if it's the real deal. And so they put me in this chair, and of course, everything is available for everyone to see. And there's like, this guy, without my permission, invites like 20 people into the room. Yep. And I will never forget, he said, he had like this Spanish accent. He goes, "Put the light on the target." Down there. And I'm like, sweat is on my upper lip. I'm sure I am like beet red. I will never forget that. So literally that is how I felt after I wrote this book and people were starting to read it. It was like this guy saying, "Put the light on the target." Now I am the target again. I can't do anything about it.
Real, right? This is so real. That is the best story. I almost wish that one was mine. I wish that was my story.
I will never forget. Honestly, I look back at it and I'm like, why didn't I speak up and say, I'm actually uncomfortable here. Could we have about 15 of these people step out? I mean, seriously.
Why don't we? Because that is common. We hear that a lot from women, and certainly there'll be some men as well. And it doesn't, connect with all women, but that's very, very common of women. Why don't we?
That is a great question, because as much as I am a direct communicator and am comfortable using my voice, it's situational. And I have found myself in some really
compromising
circumstances. And I have a really funny story to share, but I'll probably have to save it for another day. I don't know how we're doing on time. Where I did time? Okay. So I'm going to try to make this as quick as possible, but it really illustrates this perfectly. Several years ago, I was going to a massage therapist who I loved, and I had a package with her, and I would just re-up the package. Well, she was leaving this particular practice, and I had one left. So the new person's coming in. I'm going to finish that with this new person, and then I'm going to go follow her where she's leaving to go to. So I've never worked with this person before. I can't even, when I tell you this, I'm embarrassed to actually tell the story.
I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud of you. Keep sharing.
All right. So I have everything on, everything off except for my underwear. So, this is vulnerable, right? This is a stranger. You're half naked. So it starts off with a scalp massage that is beyond painful. Do I speak up? No. Like I'm proving something that I can endure this pain. All right. So it gets better. I tell her, I want to lay on my back, and I have the sheet covering me, and I just want you to do my neck and back, right? So I want you to like go underneath my back and massage. Well, she does that, but then she decides that she is going to manipulate my stomach. I don't know what this one was doing. She takes like a teeny tiny towel and puts it across my boobs. I'm so uncomfortable. She's pressing on my stomach, and I don't say anything. Now it gets better.
Oh, no.
She pulls the sheet back up. Okay, so now I'm fully covered again. But she tells me that she's going to put one hand behind my upper back and one hand underneath the back of my knees, and she's cradling me. She starts rocking me like I'm a baby. Do I speak up? Nope. All right. Now this is how we end this scenario. She tells me, okay, she stops rocking me and she says, I want you to reach forward and touch your toes, on the count of 3. I'm like, okay. So I reach forward and touch my toes. And this is a larger woman. She jumps behind me on the table, pushes me forward. I thought I was going to snap my hamstrings. I never spoke up. I never said a word. I'm so embarrassed to even share the story, but like, it was pretty damn funny. And it's a good learning experience for me, because what I came away from that was I was mad at myself. And I'm like, I cannot, like, you can't even make this story up. No. It is so bizarre and so crazy. And I recognize that the reason why I didn't speak up was because I was in this vulnerable situation where I wasn't fully clothed. And so, like, to anticipate, all right, that's a trigger point for me to like be real quiet. So if there's situations that are similar like that in the future, now I know, okay, no, you got to use your voice, It's just so ridiculous.
So I hope that you're not in a similar situation to that in the future. Otherwise, Kris, I think there's something else at play. Right. That said, I love that there is something to learn through all of these situations that we find ourselves in. And instead of burying ourselves in the shame or whatever one may be feeling, there is something to be learned from that. And I like that about the vulnerability piece, because we feel small and quiet, don't we, when we feel vulnerable?
Right.
So I have a couple more questions. I'll start with one from someone who asked about how you deal with balance, and there was a beauty comment in there too, but let you deal with that how you wish. But the whole idea of balance, beauty, family, self-care, how do you look at all of that?
So I'm probably going to answer that in a way that people wouldn't necessarily expect. So to me, beauty and balance happens when I'm able to be my best self. And I can only do that if I am giving myself enough quiet time every single day to think, because I am an introvert. I can be really extroverted, so it confuses people, but I'm an introvert at heart. I need to recharge by myself. So I need time to self-reflect and think deeply without interruption. I need to practice self-care. So yoga and meditation and eating right, not all the time, but a lot of the time, is really, really important to me. Living my values. If I'm not able to do that, then I'm not living authentically. And like being okay that, maybe what's important to me isn't important to you, but I have to live my values, or else I am not going to feel beautiful, and I'm not going to be my best self. I think part of it is, wearing things that do make you feel beautiful and make you feel confident. So there is a multi-layered answer for me, but it really gets back to just embracing myself and not trying to please everyone else.
I think that you captured it really well, that it's all an inside job. Mm-hmm. And then the stuff on the outside, yes, can give you that extra sort of bounce in your skipping your step.
Yep.
But it's all that inner stuff. So thank you for sharing that. And then the final question we have from one of our audience members is a 3-part question. So maybe I'll just ask you all 3, and then you could start with the one, and if you need me to repeat the others, you can do that. So do you think that it's possible for men to be that vulnerable in terms, I think, of how these women shared in the book that you interviewed? If not, what's holding them back? And will you be doing a book on men?
Okay, well, that's a great topic. So I think that right now I'm not going to say it's not possible. I think anything's possible, but I do think that it's difficult for men to be this vulnerable in the same way that the women were and are generally more with each other than I think men are. And I think this goes back to how we raise our boys from the time that they are young. And this is really globally, in that for the most part, society tells little boys it's not okay to cry, it's not okay to express emotions, which really, by the way, is denying their humanness. And that, pull your big boy pants on, suck it up, be a man. All of these messages that they get from the time they are very little creates a culture of shame. And so there's really very few topics that are safe for men to talk about with each other. They might have these kind of vulnerable conversations with a significant other, or maybe not. But for the most part, I don't think men are talking about some of these same topics. They might talk about politics, business, sports. Those are pretty safe topics to talk about. What was the second one?
If not, what is holding them back?
Okay, so I think that's 1 and 2. And then I am going to do my next book. I finally decided this last week on men. I'm not going to start it till next year, and I am going to co-author it with a man, because I feel like it's going to be really important to have that balance of the male and female perspective, not only for the interviews, but also for the writing and the interpretation of it. So I'm really excited about that. And I haven't announced it yet, except for right here, right now. But this is somebody I met through LinkedIn, who is also an author and a good friend. And so I'm really excited to do this with him.
Well, thank you for sharing that here on the show. Exclusive.
Yes, it is.
Exclusive.
Breaking news.
Breaking news. And I'm thrilled to hear that. I know many people who have read your book and know you will be thrilled to hear that, because one of the things that I recall hearing from you that I believe surprised you, that also surprised me, was that some men have found value in this book that you have written, #NoApprovalNeeded. So no doubt, similarly, there will be women who, while the book is intended obviously for men and give the male perspective, there also will be women who will be able to read and learn from that as well.
Absolutely. And I think, it'll help with the relationships that we have, whether it's our parents, our sons, our siblings, our significant others, our coworkers. They're keeping a lot in, and they're keeping a lot together, and it's not sustainable in the long term, I don't think.
I completely agree, and love that you're delving into that. So thank you again for sharing that breaking news with us here. And also, we're at the top of the hour, so now is my time to say thank you to you, Kris. Really deeply from the bottom of my heart. Thank you for making me laugh. Thank you for making me ponder, and thank you for sharing all of who you are with myself today, as well as my audience.
Thank you. I know that we always have good laughs and real talk, and I appreciate you so much.
Thank you. And of course, thanks to all of you as well, my loyal listeners. I'd like to remind you that information about my radio show and the podcast recording of today's show can be found all over wherever you like to listen to podcasts, as well as louisehreed.com. Also, a big shout out to my producer, Cameron Steele at Contact Talk Radio Network, and always the love of my life, Jay Andrews. I'd like to leave you with one of my favorite quotes that I've been sharing at the end of podcasts recently, and that is, be bold enough to use your voice, brave enough to listen to your heart, and strong enough to live the life you've always imagined. Until next Tuesday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, I'm Louise H. Reed, wishing all of you an amazing day. Bye, friends.